Hello everyone, this is Ohio Dan. The topic for today's video, and this is something that I probably should have talked about quite a while back, because it does pertain to the MGTOW point of view and something I've seen within the community be kind of a source for confusion, and that is that for those men who consider a MGTOW type lifestyle, it's important to realize that the core guidelines often discussed within MGTOW circles aren't arbitrary in nature. These ideas are not put out there in a way that's arbitrary to just try to tell men what to do. These particular guidelines exist for good reason that are substantiated based in fact, not based on just an opinion or just sort of a whimsical personal choice. So what am I talking about? In particular, the idea that you really shouldn't get married, you shouldn't have children in the conventional way, you probably shouldn't live with a woman, and I'm adding this, people can disagree with this as being a legitimate guideline, but I think that in a post-Me Too environment, you should not date or have any sexual interactions with a woman that you work with a coworker, with a boss, or anything like that, someone that works for you, an employee. You should not, as some have put it, crap where you eat. That, I think, is really important today as well. And I think this would have been included if MGTOW had been in its sort of golden age after Me Too came to be. But nonetheless, these are not rules that are put in place merely to restrict your choices or to claim membership in some sort of club that we can call MGTOW. That's not the point of these guidelines. It's not to say you can't do this because you're somehow committing some sort of infraction or sin if you do it. Sin in a loose sense, not just in a religious sense. That's not what it's about. It's about looking at different aspects of society for how they are and different choices that are available to men and recognizing the pitfalls that are involved with marrying a woman, having children in a conventional way with a woman, living with a woman, or having any sort of sexual interactions at all with the woman that you work with, and dating her or anything like that at all. Because the consequences if these things go wrong are so dire that there's really no safe, sensible way to do that unless you are basically committed to, I have to have a family, I have to do it the conventional way. You're better off avoiding these things because they are so inherently dangerous to you as a guy that these guidelines have to pretty much be presented as they are, because any other sort of advice or any other sort of commentary would be doing you a disservice if these guidelines weren't put out there. Because the consequences of divorce, of losing child custody or even having to go through a child custody dispute, of living with a woman with the domestic violence laws being the way that they are, these things are so detrimental to you potentially if you're a guy in a way that you don't really have control over. And again, a woman that you may work with, whom you find attractive, whom you fancy, that also seems to like you as well, what happens after the breakup and she decides she's going to take it out on you and be vindictive? Well, you're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your livelihood. And unless you wanted that to happen, that's not good. And so these guidelines exist for particular reasons. They are a result of what happens to men in these situations in modern Western countries where feminism is essentially won. There's basically a two-tier system where certain rules only apply to men and then other rules only apply to women as it relates to one another, as it relates to other women, but they don't apply to men. In other words, essentially women can do whatever they want to men and it's going to be your fault. You're the one that's going to get false accusations potentially made against you. You're the one that's going to lose your home. You're the one that's going to lose your kids. These guidelines are not arbitrary. They are a response to how things actually are in the real world for men today, particularly in Western countries, in the Western world. They're not just meant to say you're prohibited from doing this. It's to say that you no longer have any real control over where your life's going to go if you make these decisions, because it's going to be her house. because she can call the cops at any time and probably get you arrested with no evidence. The family courts also don't really have any sort of requirement, any sort of burden of proof when it comes to the evidence that she has to bring against you if your wife is divorcing you, to say that you're abusive, to say that you abuse the kids, to say that here's all the horrible things that you've done. And if you don't get a judge that happens to be reasonably impartial, what do you think's going to happen once you're in that scenario? Even if you're just living with a woman, even if you're not married and you just have kids with a woman, all these things can so easily befall you that this is why these guidelines exist. It's not just we're going to tell men that to be part of our club, these are the things we have to do. I get the idea that that's the impression that a lot of men may get when they find MGTOW related content. And that's the sort of catalyst for me making this commentary, making this video, that no, these rules exist for specific reasons based on what can so easily happen to men once they do get married or have kids or live with a woman or date a woman that they work with a job that they actually want to keep. So these guidelines are rational implications of navigating the world that we live in today and how your sovereignty as a man can be easily compromised when you choose to engage in marriage, in having children in the conventional way, in living with a woman or dating a woman that could cost you your job so easily. The real world implications of that are so drastic that you really are in hot water without even realizing it if you are a man that chooses to do those things. It's one thing to go into these scenarios with your eyes open. For the guys that feel like they have to choose a traditional path, it's still not healthy, but at least you're aware of the risk and you can recognize how seriously you need to vet the woman that you're with, how seriously you need to make sure that any red flags are identified. If you don't think that she's going to be loyal to you for any reason, you need to get out of the relationship, etc. Don't just get a woman pregnant. Know what you're trying to do and why, and recognize that she holds the cards. If you're willing to do that with your eyes open, then I'm not saying that some men aren't going to ultimately choose that path. A lot of men will choose that path. But to just say, well, we're going to dismiss MGTOW ideas because that's stupid. You can't just walk away from women. It's natural to just have children. It's natural to want to live with the person that you're dating. It's natural to get married. That's foolishness. It doesn't investigate at all. It doesn't assess at all what actually happens to men in these situations. It doesn't look at what the family courts do in practice. It doesn't look at what false allegations in the workplace will do. It doesn't look at how children can be weaponized against you so easily, and how you're essentially just giving a woman a child because she is going to have the vast majority of authority over that kid, and if she wants to cut you out, she probably can. And then you get to pay child support for a kid that you may never get to see. This happens every day in the United States and other Western countries. And so that is why these guidelines are important. It's not about trying to tell men what they have to do. It's a matter of saying that these are the essential ideas, the essential foundations upon which you can go your own way, if that's what you choose to do. But if you are going to go your own way, you can't be married in a gynocentric culture, post-feminism and with no-fault divorce. You can't have kids in a society that thinks that the best interests of the mother and the best interests of the child are synonymous, that what's good for the kid is to just be with the mom, and maybe if you're lucky, you'll get to play some sort of role in that upbringing of that kid. That's where our culture is today. That's where our legal system is today. And so all of these ideas are put out there because they reflect what things are actually like for men today. And basically, if you're going to do those things, do it with your eyes open, but you can't do those things and go your own way because you're no longer in any control over what happens to you if the woman that you have put a metaphorical gun to your head, if you are willing to furnish her with that weapon, she can now essentially decide to destroy you at any time. And the state and the culture are probably going to take her side. You're going to be very fortunate not to suffer a major blow in life, a major detrimental experience, if she just decides that she can be happier with somebody else, or she doesn't need you to raise the kids, or she can just make up things that are completely false about you to get back at you for something she didn't like that you did. She can decide to do that at any point. If you decide to live with her, have kids with her, get married, or potentially have her at your workplace. You're dating her, you're in a relationship of some kind, or you're just essentially having something sexual with her, and then she decides that she's going to make you pay. She's going to punish you for something that you said or did or whatever. It can be anything, and she has that control. So you can't really go your own way and give a woman that much power over your life. That's why these guidelines exist. It's not arbitrary. We're just telling men that this is what they have to do. It's for these real, tangible, consequential reasons. Getting married, to be specific again, requires a contract with the government that can lead to you getting screwed over at any future time if the woman decides she's not happy. Living with a woman subjects you to domestic violence laws that will typically be applied against you if the police are ever called to your house or place of residence, regardless of who is actually at fault and who's actually being violent, if anybody. Having children in the conventional manner will lead to child support payments and potential future heartbreak if the mother ever decides to weaponize your kids against you. Dating a woman that you work with can easily lead to a Me Too experience if she is dissatisfied with you for any reason afterwards. And again, this is assuming you didn't actually do anything bad. She just wants to make up something and say that it wasn't consensual because you didn't want to continue dating her anymore. It can be literally that simple and straightforward. You are no longer in control, and control is kind of an illusion anyway, to be fair, but you no longer have any control over what's going to happen to you once you put yourself in that type of compromised position. So if you want to take the risk, you pretty much have to be all in, or you can walk away from that. And that's the whole point of these guidelines. It is because of the common results of taking these sorts of actions or making these choices that I've mentioned that MGTOW guidelines recommend against them. Not because of any arbitrary ruling over what should and shouldn't be permitted according to personal preference from one particular guy. It's not about personal preference. It's about if you're going to walk away from a system that basically wants to exploit you and treat you poorly on a consistent basis because you're a guy and you're seen as basically an oppressor of women, that you're seen as having to make up for patriarchy oppressing women throughout history, you are in a negative spot. And if you make these kinds of choices, you are yielding your sovereignty over to a particular woman. You really are. And you can still make that choice. I'd encourage guys to really think hard before they do decide to get married or have kids or whatnot. But that choice is still freely available to you. But you're probably not going to be able to get out of that very cleanly and very intact if it goes wrong and the woman decides that she's just going to basically be spiteful and vindictive and try to hurt you. You're screwed once she decides to do that because the culture and the state and the legal system is pretty much completely on her side. The purpose of these guidelines within the MGTOW philosophy and point of view should be understood on this basis. It is a response to what actually happens to men who put themselves in these situations, not just a set of rules that we're telling men that they need to follow, that they're forced to follow for any reason. These guidelines should be understood on that basis so that men don't draw any inaccurate conclusions over what these ideas represent and why they are important. In other words, I want guys to understand that it's not a matter of telling you what you have to do or even should do. It's a matter of understanding what could likely happen to you if you don't want to take this seriously. And you want to say MGTOW is just stupid and it's just for losers and guys that are sent their own way and whatever the case may be from your point of view. It doesn't matter what your opinion on that is. These are real tangible threats to a man's ability to have a good life. Getting married, having kids in the conventional way, living with a woman, and I would argue having any sort of sexual interactions at all with the woman that you work with, these are all terrible ideas unless you feel like you have to do it. unless you feel like you're willing to deal with the consequences, even if it could break you later. It's still a choice, but ultimately, the guidelines for going your own way have to, just by definition, by just speaking truthfully about the consequences of these very anti-male practices and institutions, and if you choose to engage in those practices, we have to advise men not to do these things. It's not arbitrary. It's not a matter of telling men what they must do. But if you're going to maintain any sovereignty or control over your own decision-making and over what it is that you choose to do in life, getting married and having kids is not the way to accomplish that anymore. That's a way to make you completely at a woman's mercy, pretty much. It's a way for you to be in a compromised position where the woman can ruin you at any time, and maybe if you're lucky, you'll have a man cave while she has the rest of the house. Maybe if you're lucky, she won't take your kids away. Maybe if you're lucky, she won't decide to pull that metaphorical trigger because you decided to play Russian roulette in that fashion, because you decided that you're going to give her that sort of opportunity. No one deserves to have that opportunity, but if you want to make that decision, you can. But ultimately, these guidelines for going your own way exist to prevent these sort of very drastically negative, very damaging, or even mortal outcomes for the men that can avoid these gynocentric, corrupted institutions and practices that no longer even care about your well-being, that no longer are about you having some sort of obligation to a family, to a wife and children, and getting something for that in return. It is just a matter of shackling you to that institution, to that role in society, to force you to be productive, to force you to do what your supposed betters want you to do. And if you want to avoid that outcome, then it's important to take these MGTOW guidelines seriously. The people, and the men in particular, that dismiss the value of these concepts are doing themselves a disservice. They're foolish for thinking that even if you don't particularly want to be going your own way, that there's no validity behind these ideas. To deny that, to say that you should get married if you want or have kids if you want, would be the wrong message. And that's why MGTOW guidelines take this form. That's why they suggest that men not engage in these practices, that they stay single, or if they're going to be in a relationship, be able to get out of it, don't commit to her, don't have kids, don't live with her, etc. Don't work with her on something that you financially have to do to make a living. Just stay away from all that and you'll be better off. And that's the point of MGTOW guidelines, not just to arbitrarily tell men what to do. It's not that type of thing at all, but it is a matter of just speaking truthfully about what men are up against and giving them a way to avoid being exploited and completely losing control over their lives because they got with a woman that they ceded all that control to, and now they're in a really negative spot. That's why these guidelines exist, to help men avoid that potential outcome and to do what's healthy for themselves and what's going to be better for their long-term future instead.